Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Kristie Robin Johnson is joining us. She's the author of High Cotton. We're so honored to have her here. She's an educator, an essayist, and poet from Augusta, Georgia. She's the current chair of the Department of Humanities at Georgia Military College's Augusta campus, where she's an assistant professor of English, but she just accepted a new position at Augusta College. So congratulations there. She's a graduate of the MFA Creative Writing program at Georgia College and State University. Kristie's writing has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and has received other awards and recognition, including the 2020 Porter Fleming Prize for Nonfiction and the 2021 Page Prize for Flash Nonfiction. Her work has been published in numerous literary magazines, journals, and anthologies. Her first book, High Cotton, which we just read for our book club, was released in 2020 by Raised Voice Press and was recognized as a finalist in the Memoir category for the 2021 Georgia Author of the Year. So thank you so much for joining us, Kristie. We're so happy to have you. Let's start this off by asking, was there a moment of inspiration when you knew you wanted to write a book, or did it just come to you gradually?
So I've always wanted to write. So I've always known, like, even from a young age, I would say as early as at least 14 or 15, that writing was going to be a part of, what I do with my life. I didn't know how to make it fit. I didn't have many people in my immediate circle who were professional writers. And I knew a lot of teachers, and I knew a lot of, folks who worked at the airport or lawyers or things like that. But I didn't know anybody who was a published writer. So I didn't understand how to get from wanting to write to having written. So it took me a long time, but I've always wanted to do it. It wasn't kind of a thing that, I kind of lived a long life and woke up, oh, I should put it down. No, I've always wanted to write. I've always admired the work, particularly of memoirists. I think the first memoir that I read that really made me think, wow, I can do this, would be Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sing.
First one I read too. And
it just kind of opened me up to the possibilities of telling one story. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it's a great book. This was the first book of essays that we've actually reviewed in our book club, and it really changed the way I feel about essay collections. I've read just a couple others before, and one thing that I found really remarkable about yours is that you left these little breadcrumbs in the essays that made me want to know more. And whereas some of the other essays, each of your pieces did stand alone, but there were just little pieces that made me think this is going to come up again later. And I really appreciated how you did that and really enjoyed that. And I have to say, I'm looking at books of essays with a more open mind now. I was wondering, why did you choose the essay format for your memoir? And did you ever consider doing a more traditional chronological approach?
So what's really interesting is that I didn't think about it at all as a memoir until the folks at Georgia Author of the Year put it in the memoir category, to be completely honest with you. I always thought of it as just a bunch of personal narratives. And so what I'm hearing now a lot in the industry is this idea of a memoir and essays, and essentially that's what it is. Like, I didn't know that's what it was going to be at the time, but that's essentially what it is. So I really, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, there's a set of essays. And when my publisher picked it up, like in my mind, I had, okay, these essays go in this section, this section, this section. And then just kind of like what you just said, Christina, my editor was like, no, they really all can stand alone. Let's play around with, let's not try to force the order. Let's let the order be a bit more emotional rather than chronological. And so that's what we kind of went with. But even then, I'm still, in my mind, I'm still thinking essays. And it was really funny when we submitted High Cotton. And for the award, we actually submitted in the essay collection category, but there were not enough entries in the essay collection category. So they were like, well, it reads like memoir, so we'll just shift it over to memoir. And and the rest is history. So, so on the second part of that, have I considered a full memoir? Now I have. And matter of fact, that's actually what I'm working on like right now. The intro, the first essay in the book is Dope, right? Which focuses on my mother and her addiction. And so the memoir will focus primarily on that, from pretty much from the time of my birth until the point where she passed away. So I'm really excited about that. And it's very different. I'm finding it a little bit harder than the essay collection to try to get down on the page, but it's coming together.
Excellent. Was there a book of essays that inspired you?
I went back to, and I'm actually going back to right now, Slouching Towards Jerusalem, Sean Didion. One of the essay collections that I read around the time that I started with High Cotton was Roxane Gay's Bad Feminist. And so, and what I learned, what I noted in that book was that as much as there were kind of these broad essays about culture and life in general, she always had a personal, they're always kind of personal at heart. A current essayist who I love and I recommend to anybody who's thinking about writing essays or just wants to read more essays, Hanif Abdurraqib. I love him. The most recent of his collection is A Little Devil in America. And so they're all kind of culture pieces, but he starts every single one with a personal story. And I really, really enjoy his work in particular. And it was someone, actually, Georgia Rowe introduced me to Hanif Abdurraqib. And so that's how I kind of got, like, at the time I started reading a lot of his work. And so I did try to, when writing my essay collection, I had certain writers in mind, for sure.
Great. We'll have to look those up. When you were choosing the order of these essays, did it come to you naturally, or do you have to have, was it difficult for you to decide which went where, and did you have somebody else helping you figure out that timeline?
I thought I had the order. I thought I had the order in the way that they were supposed to go. But when it was working with my editor, she had a different idea. And so we kind of came to a nice compromise. We both agreed about the first and the last, for sure, like what we wanted to start it and where it ended. But there was a lot of changes in the middle. So it definitely, if you go down to Georgia College right now and the stack of theses, because this is actually my MFA thesis, that's how High Cotton started. And you pull that book, it's not going to look anything kind of like High Cotton. It's very, there's a lot of the essays are the same, but it's very different in terms of how it reads.
And tell us about your editor then. Tell us about how you came to that relationship and how that helped your book become what it is today.
So I went with a small press, Raised Voice Press. Karen Pickle, the publisher, and she also was because it's a small press, was also very hands-on with the editing. And that was an interesting relationship at first, because you really want to trust somebody with your work. And so her approach was, she was really kind, she was really compassionate. I felt good, like she made me feel safe. Like it was like that there were certain parts of the work that wouldn't lose their essence after going through the editing process. I definitely felt safe with her. And I think that's kind of one of the benefits also, I'll say this, of having gone with a small press, that they're able to do that. From my understanding, sometimes bigger publishing houses, they kind of maybe take over and you kind of lose a bit of the creative control, but it was really a partnership, and I really, really appreciated that. What I tell my students often, after having gone through that process, is don't marry yourself to what's on the page, even if it gets published in a journal, even if it gets, like, don't marry yourself to it. Always try to remain flexible, because sometimes there is a better interpretation. And so I had to learn that about a few of the essays in high cotton.
So were there some essays that you wanted to include but decided to leave out?
There were a couple. There were a couple. There are probably about 3 that just didn't make the cut. After just going back and forth, trying to find a good fit. And then there were a couple that initially were not a part of high cotton that got added in. The one that's structured as a letter to Mary J. Blige, Dear Mary, that got added in at the very end. Like, that was not even a part of the original submission. And so we were, that was after a lot of thinking and talking, like, oh, I could take this out, but I have this one that's about Mary J. Blige, what do you think? And then it was like, oh, perfect, it fits. So yeah, there were a few that are kind of sitting now, still kind of waiting for a home, and maybe they'll find a home somewhere.
Your essays tackled some pretty heavy topics, some challenging things like drug use and sexual assault and racism and more. And I really admire how you managed to manage these with like a light hand, and you were never preaching or telling the reader how to feel. It was just felt very honest. And I was wondering if you were ever tempted to stick to easier topics, and if you have some advice for us when we go to write essays about challenging subjects, if you have some advice on how to approach that.
Well, thank you for saying that. So here's the thing, I guess with me, because my life has been pretty complicated. And so at the point when I decided, well, I'm going to write about my life, there weren't a lot of easy times, if I'm just going to be honest about it. For certain time periods, there just weren't a lot of easy kind of light topics that lent themselves. And one of the things that I noticed right away, because I initially set out to write about me and my oldest son, because I thought it was a unique story. So he's 22, he has autism, and there weren't a lot of stories about African Americans in particular dealing with disability. And I thought that would be, really unique. And then I tried to write, and I started to write. And a few things I learned that I wasn't particularly good at writing about my kids as I am about my mother and grandmother. A lot of that has to do with the obvious fact that they had passed on already. So as a memoirist and as an essayist, when you're dealing with a living, somebody else is living, you have to be really, really sensitive to that. And so it just turned out that I had more to say about my experiences with my ancestors. So those are the things that just kind of came to the surface in terms of writing hard stuff, traumatic things. So one thing that I tell my students all the time when we do have workshop, particularly with essays, but sometimes this comes up with poetry too. But what I tell them all the time is that in my experience, just as a reader and a writer, in my humble opinion, you have to be a little bit ruthless and a little bit reckless if you're going to write serious memoir. Because the truth just isn't, that's just life, right? The truth is not, rose-colored glasses. There's always some hardness to the truth, and you have to be honest about it. But if you are at a point in your life where you have separated the shame and you can talk about it freely, I think you can write about it. But if you still have some shame about it, then maybe wait, maybe, and I say this like not even jokingly, therapy is great, getting it out. But once you're at a point where, look, I have no shame, this is what it is, this is what I experienced, maybe, I can, maybe my sharing it will bless someone else in some way, then I say go for it. But you got to be honest.
I have read some memoirists actually say that writing about it and getting it out there in the world actually took away the power of the shame. I think Mary Karr has quoted something like that. So it's a matter of, I think you're right, that you do need to be careful about where you are in the process. And if you're not ready yet, then maybe come back to that. You can write about it now, but don't put it out in the world
Exactly. And that's one of the books that I actually read while writing was The Art of Memoir by Mary Karr. It was really helpful. It helped me to kind of deal with the living folks more than anything. It was really helpful in that sense.
Do you have any advice on that piece? That's something we're all scared of, is
Yeah.
the lashback from people who we write about.
So with that, and this comes like literally like verbatim straight from The Art of Memoir from Mary Karr. So this is not Kristie Robin Johnson. This is Mary Karr. One of the things that really worked really well for me when I started to write about folks who I wanted to maintain a positive relationship with, I would let them see it. I would, ask for their blessing, ask for their okay, and then I would let them choose their pseudonym. So that way they feel like they had, some input and some power in that. And it's been my experience that people are often very flattered. I have a pretty like a small type group of sister girls, girlfriends. It's about 6 of us. And so what's so funny, I have a few that are like, you've never written about me. Like they start to get jealous. So it's kind of funny. But yeah, that's how I handle it when it's a relationship that I definitely want to maintain, right? So on the opposite, if it's a relationship that I quite frankly care not to maintain, like I really don't care about at all anymore, I may or may not change the name. I don't stress about it. I don't call them because here's the thing: memoir is always your memory. I can never tell somebody else's side ever. I'm never going to get it right. So I don't even try. I'm very honest about that. That's why it's kind of harder for me to write about my kids because I don't want to take their voice. I don't want people to perceive it as me taking their voice. But one of the things you have to accept is that memory is messy and that no two people will remember the same experience the same. So as long as you own your memory, your recollection, and you're honest in the fact that it's yours and it may not be the way that your mother or your grandmother or your father remembered it, it's okay because it's your memoir. When they write their memoir, they can write it from their perspective, but you can only write from the perspective of your experience.
Definitely. Yeah, good advice there. Thank you. You received your master's in creative writing. Are you glad that you pursued that? And was it worth it to you? How do you feel about it?
100% for me. It's an easy yes for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand other folks though who feel like this, like I get it because sometimes and it depends on what you go into a program expecting. So I went into a program expecting I definitely want to get published. Like that was kind of the thing. I really want to be published. And I did expect that teaching would be a part of it, but I already had a job in higher ed. I wasn't teaching, but I already came from higher ed. So that was my perspective. So that was my expectation. And here's the other thing. My undergrad is political science, and I had a master's in public administration. I was writing as a hobbyist when I went into the MFA. So I didn't come with a bachelor's, in English. Like I literally, my first creative writing class was in that MFA. I remember preparing for workshop and students were telling me, oh, this is going to be like crazy. Are you ready? and so for me, from a beginner's mind, I'm like, no, I think it's going to be okay, And then so my first workshop was Peter Selden. Oh God. And but I'm so thankful for that experience because it changed the way I write from that moment on. And it wasn't bad. It wasn't like he didn't like tear it to pieces. I mean, he critiqued the hell out of it, but he didn't tear it to pieces. I learned really quickly what I felt like my writing was missing. And so for me, the MFA, like I can go back and look at my whole body of work and I can tell very quickly, this was pre-MFA, this was post-MFA. So I appreciate it because I needed it. I feel like I needed it.
Excellent. Your book also tells us about the brave choice you made to pursue writing and some of the struggles associated with that choice. I'd love to hear more about how you came to that choice and how you feel about it in retrospect. And I hope you're writing about that in your memoir, because I want to know more.
No, like I won't get to that part. I really will get only up until the point where my mother passed away in that one. The decision to kind of go to school. So I'd always written, whether it was, just journaling for myself or like writing essays and sending them to different places. I was like trying to submit work to certain places. And so I want to say it was around 2011, 2012. I was going through, I won't say a midlife crisis because I hope I got a little bit more life, but certainly a personal crisis. I was going through a divorce. I had already kind of made that decision. My ex-husband and I had made that decision. And I was at that time in an administrative role at a technical college. And I was also writing, and I got a column. I had a column at a local paper here in Augusta. And so that was my first inkling that I could really do this professionally, that I could pursue it. I had a little following. People would read it weekly and say, hey, I read, this and that. And that was kind of fun. And so I think since I was kind of in that mode of just kind of like F it, because I was leaving the marriage, I was like, F it. So I don't recommend it to anybody at all. But I just was like, if I'm going to do it, I guess I'm going to do it now. And I applied to 2 schools. I applied to Georgia College here in Milledgeville. Before I applied, there were 2 other things that I did. I talked to 2 individuals who I knew locally who had pursued an MFA. One was a commercial writer. Her name is Karen Gillespie. She writes romance novels. But she did her MFA at Converse in South Carolina. And so I sat down and talked with her, just kind of asked if she thought it was worth it, that type of thing. So I got her input. And for her, she said it was good in terms of allowing her to teach. But as far as writing, because she already kind of had a following and she writes genre, right? So it was a little bit different for her. Like I don't think she got what I got out of it, just because we write in different modes. But it was really good to have that conversation with her. And then I started researching MFA programs, and then Newsweek had this top 10 list. Georgia College was on the top 10 list. So, shout out to Marty Landon.
And did you have published, so you'd already been writing in the paper at that point. Did you have some other published essays already when you went in?
I did. There was one other space, one platform, Atlanta Free Speech. So the lady who was running this platform at the time, I think her name is Tina Farrell, but her claim to fame was she's the great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells. And so if you don't know who Ida B. Wells is, a quick and dirty history. Ida B. Wells was an African-American woman, a writer, and she wrote around the time. She was an anti-lynching writer. And so her work is kind of thought to be revolutionary as a journalist, because she was writing very dangerously at the time. And she lived in Tennessee. So you can kind of do the quick research, but she was Ida B. Wells's great granddaughter. And so I thought, oh, this is so cool. And so Atlanta Free Speech was kind of her take on what her great grandmother had done in terms of journalism. And so she offered me a platform on her space. So I got to write for her regularly as well. So that's one of those 2 in particular, the first 2 places that were like publishing my work.
Do you have some advice for us on how we can get our essays published?
Submit. Submit every day, make it monthly, don't let a month go by where you haven't submitted, 2 or 3 works. I keep a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and I have all my little things. And so when something gets rejected, I highlight it in yellow. When something gets accepted, I highlight it in green. And like today, if I were to pull it up, you'd see like there's probably about 130 yellow and maybe 10 green. But the idea is that you got to be willing to get the rejection. So that's going to be a part of it. And don't take the rejections personally. This is something that I know that Georgia and I both know, having been readers, right, for arts and letters. A lot of times folks who are reading them, they're only giving it like one look, one page. So it doesn't mean that the work isn't good. It doesn't mean that the work isn't, strong. It just means that that reader on that day didn't catch them in that first page. Because it's true, like you do, because we would have so many queued. I had to read creative nonfiction and fiction. And honestly, if it didn't catch my the first page, because it would be like 150 to read, then you got to keep moving on. So don't feel bad. Like, don't feel bad. But the most important thing is to submit. Now I say that, but also be diligent in researching the journals, because some places, like there are some places that are better fits than others. And so I learned to do that really early. I do think that there is a benefit to a well-run conference. I believe in conferences. Most connections I've made, like positive connections that I've made, have been quite literally at the bar at AWP, like just at the hotel bar. Like you're just running into folks and exchanging cards or telling them, hey, you can make a lot of good connections at a well-run conference. Some conferences are not as, some are shady, so you want to be careful. At a well-run, solidified conference. I love AWP. I've tried to, since the MFA, I try to go every other year. I haven't always done that. The last one I made was San Antonio in 2020, but there's always a good connection to make. A lot of people will honor their word. Like if you talk to them and they say, hey, well, send us something. I've gotten a few things published that way.
Okay. Good to know. Is that how you found your publisher, or how did you find your publisher?
That was just through, so I didn't meet her at AWP, but I did just through submitting, like literal submissions. There were a few, I knew that I wanted to start with a small press. That was, and I'll be honest about that, might not have been the best decision, because a lot of that was made out of insecurity. But I had heard from so many people, oh, well, no, big houses don't do creative nonfiction or that type of thing. So I just was like, okay, well, I'm not even gonna try for an agent or a big house. I'll just start small. And I sent it to a few small, so I just researched and went to a few small places. So the thing that I noted right away about Raised Voice Press is that they only did creative nonfiction. So check, right? So that I knew that that would be a place that would want an essay collection. They had a tendency to work with female writers, check, right? So there's some things if you research, you'll realize, oh, I'm a good fit, for this group. And so that's how I found Raised Voice, just kind of just in that cold submission for manuscripts.
And did they help you with, you've got quite a few awards under your belt. Did they help you find where to apply, or how did the process of getting these awards, how did that go for you?
There was some that they did help. There was some that they helped, and some that they suggested. Can't win them all, but Georgia Author of the Year, that was all Raised Voice, like that. That was at their suggestion. So I went with that. Now, as far as like the Porter Fleming or the Flash Nonfiction, all of those are just kind of me submitting to places, in that kind of that submit something somewhere every month rule. But for the book awards, and they were also really, really good. I would say this, they were also really good with some of those lists that would come out, getting your book on one of those lists, like to read in 2020. They were really good about that. They were really good about that. There wasn't any money for like a book tour or anything, and it was at the height of COVID. So even if there had been, we probably wouldn't have been able to do it in the way that we imagine. But as far as, kind of drumming up those accolades, they were super helpful.
And how did they help you with the marketing, or did you have to do a lot of that yourself?
A lot of it was myself, but there were things that they would do in terms of having me, especially with social media, right? Preparing things, putting something together that I can put out there. They were good about that. But with a small press, yeah, there's not a lot of money for marketing, so a lot of that is on the writer.
Did you do a lot of social media?
I suck at social media.
No one wants to do that.
Really want to be better at that. I got a website. Does Kristie know how to run her website? Absolutely not. But maybe this year we'll finally break down and just pay somebody to run the website, because I suck at social media. I hope to get better at that.
Well, has the book been selling all right, or how is it going for you?
So I'll say this, and this is good to say, because for a small press, I think we're doing okay. Very few people can say they outsold their advance. I did outsell my advance, so I actually get a royalty check every quarter. It's tiny. Amazon is the devil and God. They're God because everybody knows Amazon, and it's so easy to say, yes, you can find, and you put it right in, high cotton, Kristie Robin, bam, pops up Amazon. But Jeff Bezos gets his money. So that way.
So what did you do for your marketing?
Oh my goodness. So early on, I did a lot of local stuff. I was able to do readings outdoors, things like that. I did a small launch, had a nice little crowd come out. So that, plus a lot of push via Facebook and Instagram and places like that. That was about it. That was really about it.
Okay, well, glad that's working out for you. Thanks for sharing. One of the huge themes in your book was motherhood. And how did your sons feel about you being a writer and you writing about them?
I don't think they care at all. To be honest, they just want to know, is dinner at the same time? Is dinner gonna be on the table at 6? Okay, so so that's it. So especially my youngest one, he's super hard to impress. He's like, I don't know, he's interesting. He's a funny little guy, but but they don't care. And so right now, certainly if my oldest one wanted to read it, he could, and I would not have any problem with it, because I do feel like it's written for adults, for an adult sensibility, certainly not YA at all. My youngest, one day I believe he certainly will. I'm sure that he will, and I think that he will have a greater appreciation for it later in life. But that's just something that, he's 15, so maybe when he's 25 or 30, he'll be like, oh, my mom did this, or does this.
How are your sons doing?
They're doing well. They're doing well, enjoying the summer break, driving me crazy per usual. The baby still plays football, and now we're playing high school football. Okay. And he just made varsity, so I'm bragging a little bit because he's a sophomore, so that's kind of a big deal for him. I'll be spending a lot of Friday nights under the lights at the high school, so super excited for that. My oldest, we kind of back and forth about what to do. We'll possibly be heading to a program in Warm Springs, Georgia, where you learn a vocation or a trade. And so we're kind of prepping for that, the possibility of being away from home for a long time. So that's going to be, I'm already writing about that. I'm already trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with him being away, because he has so many needs, and I worry about him the most. Yeah.
So you said that you're writing a book about your mother and about her addictions and how that affected you. So, but then you just said that you're writing about your son too. So are you working on a second memoir, or actually, I guess it would be a third memoir at this point?
So I'm thinking it'll end up being an essay collection, because I'm thinking just about motherhood in general. I'm really thinking about mothers in general, and a lot of other, examples of mothers. But I'm thinking that, yeah, definitely there'll be some, and it feels more like an essay collection because what I've gotten down is very disjointed. And it's not all just about my kids, but a lot of it is just about mothering. In your introduction, you mentioned the Page Prize for Flash. So that particular piece was a piece that was where I was not at the center. Actually, it was my very, very best friend. I met this woman on our first day of kindergarten, and we are still best friends to this day. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. And she appears in High Cotton as Farron. And so she gets to keep her name anytime I write about her. And so I wrote about her in this piece, flash piece called Things I'm Learning Watching My Friend Watch Her Mother Die. And so it was very much about her, and her mother passed away, succumbed to cancer last year. It's very much though about our relationships and the loss and about mothers. And so that will be a part, I'm sure, of this longer thing about motherhood. So it won't be just me as a mother, but mothers in general. So.
Mhm. That sounds like that could be another essay book that we'd like to read. Was there any backlash from anyone that you wrote about?
In High Cotton?
Yeah.
No, not at all. Actually, yeah, no, not at all. If I wrote, especially, the only people who would, I think, have any anger, animosity about how they might have been portrayed would probably be like an ex.
Mm-hmm.
They're not buying it anyway. Like I don't think that they would buy the book, and if they did, I don't care.
Oh, good, because I'm writing about a lot of my exes, so that makes me feel better about how this might work out for me.
I was the only one that I was really kind of I handled with kid gloves was my ex-husband, because that is a relationship that I do, we want to maintain because we do co-parent and we do that well together. So I was very kind of gentle, with that and limited with what I wrote about him. But anybody else?
And as far as the title of the book, I know I think that was one of the essays had that name, but I wondered how you came up with that title and how it's been received, and if you ever had ideas of different titles you were tossing around.
I can't remember any different titles, but I know I struggled with a title for a long time. And then just one day it kind of hit me, High Cotton. And it comes from, so I didn't have there wasn't an essay with that title, but the last essay, which is Keep Living, which is a letter to my grandmother, to Teen. And one of her sayings, it's not her saying, but any old, woman in the deep South, you would often hear, "Oh, you think you're stepping in high cotton now," right? That idea that you're doing well, you think you're fancy, that type of thing. And so that was something that she would say a lot. And it kind of stuck with me as this idea of having made it, if that's a real thing, right? And then in the prologue, I went back to, because I love Tupac Shakur. And I went back to this old quote of his, his idea of, for African Americans, cotton really being our family crest, just because of the history of enslavement. And I expounded on that. And so I felt like those were too good. And I tried to start and end on that. I started, the prologue, talked a little bit about that quote, and then ended, with that there homage to my grandmother. So it just felt fitting. The title has actually gotten a lot of positive feedback. There certainly are other works entitled High Cotton, but that was never like an issue at all.
How long did it take you to write this entire collection? I know that pieces, I'm sure, were written at different times.
I would say 2.5 years total. Like, so the 2 years of actual thesis writing, and then, well, maybe even 3. Yeah, like 2.5 to 3 years. And then the rest of the time kind of going through the edits, preparing it for publication. So say, yeah, I'll say 2.5 to 3 years from start to finish.
Great. And if you were to do it over again, is there anything you'd change?
Yeah. Yes. So I will be seeking an agent. That is something, the only thing, now this is what I will say about the MFA that I didn't get that I wish they had done. I wish they had prepared me better for the industry. Because a lot of this industry stuff I'm having to learn on my own. I went to a conference actually at Augusta University maybe 2 years ago. A publisher, I can't remember their names. It was Hub City Publishing. They're out of Spartanburg, South Carolina. And they had this a presentation about the publishing industry. And I sat in there for just an hour and a half session, and like my jaw dropped because I was like, I sat in a whole MFA for 3 years and didn't learn anything about, the difference between this and this and this and the benefits and and they broke it down and it was wonderful. And by that point, I'd already, was working with Raised Voice Press, and I love Raised Voice Press, and I love the experience that I've had. But I definitely will be seeking an agent once this next manuscript is done. And I'll definitely be shooting bigger, for a bigger house.
Good advice. Great. Thank you for sharing. Does anyone have any other questions for Kristie? They all had their input on these before we started. Oh, Rita has some. Good. And Sylvia has some. Rita asks, what was the process of writing the essays and putting the book together like? Did you do a lot of rewriting and editing? Was it agonizing sometimes?
It definitely was agonizing. There was a lot of rewriting and editing. And there were moments where I did, like I said, I really like my editor a lot, but we did bump heads a couple of times. And some of it was over cultural things. And so that was kind of a bit of a frustration. So like there would be these small things that she would just like ask me to explain. And I'm like, well, I don't feel like I need to explain it. One issue, and I think it just got to me, she asked this idea about play cousins, like what's a play cousin? So I was like, so in the Black community, a play cousin is a person who you befriend and you treat them like family. And I don't think that I'm going to say anything more than that. I'm just going to let play cousins live. I'm not going to kind of dissect that. And she wanted me to open it up a little bit more. And so my brother, I don't know where he stole this from, but he has this saying about often, sometimes as a writer of color, people want you to be the Sherpa, the cultural Sherpa, the person to like teach. And it's really not, that's not my job. I've been reading white writers all my life, European writers all my life. And there was never, if I wanted to know, I'd look it up. And so it was kind of the same thing. And so we did bump heads a couple of times on things like that. But I kind of stood my ground and she understood. And so those parts were kind of frustrating. I mean, editing is the thing. I hate revision. I absolutely hate revision. I have to do it. It's a necessary evil, but I really do hate it. That's my least favorite part of writing.
I actually did. I know, I like how you said it's not your job to be the Sherpa, but I did feel that this book was really enlightening. And I really am really glad that I read it. And I don't feel like there was anything that I feel like you explained what you needed to explain, and you told it, you kept it true to your voice, and it just felt really authentic, and I really enjoyed it. And this kind of leads into that. Rita's also asking, can you talk about how you developed your voice and style? It's stunning.
Oh, thank you, Rita, for saying that. I don't know. And I wish I could. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't have a better answer for that. So for me, and I tell folks all the time, I read a lot. I read a lot. And I think a lot of my voice is influenced kind of by what I choose to read. But also, if I'm being honest, I aim for poetic prose. Like once it's done, like that's what I aim for lines that are where you can tell that the prose was styled, if that makes any sense. So that's what I aim for, and I hope that that's what readers gravitate towards in my writing. But as far as like, what do I do to develop it? I mean, honestly, just keep writing and reading a lot.
Good advice. Carol's asked, I had already gotten the idea of using my essays in some kind of memoir, and this has been so encouraging. I appreciate it so much, including poetic prose. Thank you, thank you. And Sylvia says, how did you feel after writing the more traumatic chapters? I found writing my own utterly hollowed me out, but I did mine as memoir and one an essay approach I also write up, and it feels easier to address a single topic. I wondered if that was part of why you wrote in the essay style.
In hindsight, that may be it. It may be it's easier to compartmentalize and to kind of look at everything all together. So I'll agree with you that that's probably true. So I'm at a certain section in the memoir that I'm working on right now about my mother. And so I'm kind of getting to, I've gotten the introduction, you know, kind of the early section kind of done. And now I'm into the meat of it. And I just have a lot of moments, you know, where I break down and things like that that I did not experience while writing the essay. And I think you're right, because you can compartmentalize it. In the memoir, this long form, you every day you got to get up and go back to that place, back to that place, back to that place. So I think there's some truth to that.
Oh, and Rita's also asked, how did you decide when to use second person? Did certain essays just come out that way?
Some feel better in second person. So I really like, I think the only one I think in High Cotton is food stamps. And that was one of my favorites. And I wrote that a while back. Matter of fact, I wrote that for workshop. I wrote that for workshop. And that was one of the ones where I actually had sent that out to a journal and it had already been accepted. Like by the time we got to it in workshop, I was super excited about that piece. So food stamps, I think it was food. No. Okay, it's Broke Not Broken. It started out as food stamps or one or the other. I can't remember. I got to look at the book. So, but we changed. I think the name changed, and I think it's Broke Not Broken in High Cotton. But it started out as just food stamps because that's what it was about, food stamps. I like the you in that one, and sometimes I go to the you. I try not to do it because I don't want it to be like clunky, and this is the thing that this is what she does, right? But I have one that I've been submitting recently that is in that second person. And there's something about that second person to me that just brings the reader closer to the experience, because it's not me, it's you know, that's having to do all of that. So I like the second person, but I try really, really hard not to overdo it.
I really enjoy it too. That was one of my favorite essays of yours too. And Georgia wants to know, have you sent Dear Mary to Mary Flash?
Oh, so no, I did not, but I think it was, so I think I posted it on Facebook and somebody posted it on her like Facebook or whatever, but it was a cute response. She did respond, and that was so exciting.
That is cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kristie. That was really, really wonderful. You had a lot of wonderful information to share, and thank you for being so generous. And I'm really looking forward to what you write next.
Thank you so much. Thank y'all for having me. This has been a lot of fun.